The rain had been falling for 6 hours straight. Not the kind of rain that washes things clean. The kind that finds its way into places it shouldn't. Under doors, through window seals, into the spaces between walls. It pooled in the parking lot of Grayfield General Hospital, in dark, still mirrors that reflected nothing but the dim orange glow of sodium lamps, struggling against the dark.
Sarah Okafor sat in her car for 3 minutes before going in. She'd done this at every new job. 3 minutes. A ritual she developed during nursing school when the anxiety got bad enough to make her hands shake. 3 minutes to breathe, to remember why she'd chosen this, to remind herself that hospitals were places of healing, that the fear was just the unfamiliarity, that by next week she'd know every hallway, every supply closet, every shortcut between wards. She checked herself in the rearview mirror. 26 years old. Eyes that her mother said were too serious for someone her age. Hair tucked under the standard blue cap. Her scrubs were new. She'd ironed them that morning, which, in retrospect, felt almost embarrassingly eager. "You'll be fine," she told her reflection. Her reflection didn't look entirely convinced. She got out of the car.
The main entrance of Grayfield General was a different world from the outer one, fluorescent and relentlessly lit, with the specific smell that all hospitals shared. That particular compound of antiseptic and recycled air, and something underneath both of those, something organic and insistent that no amount of cleaning product had ever fully eliminated. A smell that said, quietly but plainly, people suffer here. The overnight receptionist, a man in his 50s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, barely looked up when she signed in. "New?" he said. "First night," Sarah said. "Ward C?" She nodded. He wrote something in a logbook and handed her a temporary badge. His expression was perfectly neutral, the practiced blankness of someone who had stopped registering new faces a long time ago. But just as she turned to go, he spoke again. "Ward C supervisor is Nurse Dalton. She'll show you around." He paused, just a half beat too long. "Stick close to her tonight." Sarah turned back. "Sorry?" "First night," he said, already looking back down at his desk. "Easy to get turned around in the East Wing. The layout's not logical." She waited for him to say something more. He didn't. She walked toward the elevators. Ward C occupied the 3rd floor of Grayfield's oldest building, the East Wing. Constructed in 1961, grafted onto the newer structure in the 1980s, with a connecting corridor that always felt slightly misaligned, like a bone that had healed wrong. The floors here were not the smooth linoleum of the main building. They were old tile, pale green, cracked in places, the grout darkened with decades of accumulated shadow. And they amplified every sound, every footstep, every wheel of a distant cart, every door that opened or closed anywhere on the floor. The elevator opened onto a dim corridor. Not dark, there was light, a row of fluorescents running the length of the ceiling, but somehow still dim, as though the light here was older, thinner, used up. 2 of the tubes near the far end had failed, and in their absence, the hallway receded into a gray-brown murk at its far end, where a set of double doors stood closed. A woman was waiting by the nurse's station. She was perhaps 60, with close-cropped white hair and the posture of someone who had spent decades on their feet and refused to let it show. She wore no expression that Sarah could identify as welcoming, but her eyes were sharp, and she extended a hand immediately. "Okafor," she said, not a question. "Yes, Sarah." "Dalton." The handshake was brief and firm. "You're late." Sarah glanced at her watch. My shift starts at... I said you're late, not that your shift is late. Dalton's voice was not unkind, exactly. It was the voice of someone who had compressed warmth into a form that could survive long-term exposure to difficulty. I needed you here 20 minutes ago to walk the floor before the medications round. We'll do a shortened version. She was already moving. Come. Sarah followed. They moved down the corridor at a pace that made Sarah's new shoes squeak against the old tile, an embarrassing sound that Dalton either didn't notice or had decided to ignore. As they walked, the older nurse spoke in a low, efficient voice, naming each room they passed, its current patient, their condition, what to watch for overnight. Room 201, Mr. Abernathy, post-operative, comfortable, check drainage every 2 hours. Room 202, Mrs. Voss, chest infection, on IV antibiotics.
And then they reached a section of the corridor where something changed. It was subtle. The lighting was the same. The tile was the same. But the air felt different here. Heavier and noticeably colder. A drop of 3 or 4 degrees that Sarah registered first as a draft from somewhere, then realized had no obvious source. There were no windows on the stretch of the hallway, no vents she could see. The cold was simply present, the way a smell is simply present, without explanation. She looked at the doors on either side. 210, 211, 212, 213. And then, nothing. Where 214 should have been, there was a door. She could see its outline, the faint impression of a frame in the wall. But it had been covered, plastered over, painted the same institutional green as the walls around it, so that if you weren't looking for it, you might not notice it at all. But she was looking, because the numbering on the doors across the hall had skipped from 213 to 215 without acknowledgement, and that was the kind of thing her mind snagged on. What happened to 214? She asked. Dalton had already passed it. She stopped when Sarah spoke, but she didn't turn around immediately. A pause of perhaps 2 seconds, not long enough to be alarming, but long enough to register. Then she turned. "Storage," she said. "There's a door there," Sarah said, "plastered over. Old storage. Structural issue, years ago. That section was closed." Dalton's voice was even, practiced. "It's not on your grounds. It's not accessible. Don't concern yourself with it." She held Sarah's gaze for a moment. Her expression was the same as it had been all evening. Controlled, efficient, giving nothing away. But there was something in the quality of that gaze. Not fear, exactly. Something older than fear. The expression of someone who's decided, through experience and deliberate effort, not to look at something that is very clearly there. "Shall we continue?" Dalton said. They continued. The medications round took 40 minutes. Sarah performed it competently, checking names against charts, dispensing with steady hands, making conversation with the patients who were awake. Mrs. Voss, who was indeed anxious, and talked for 9 minutes about her daughter in Edinburgh. Mr. Abernathy, who was groggy and amiable, and kept calling her Nurse Patricia, who had apparently been his favorite. A teenage boy in 217, recovering from appendix surgery, who was awake playing a game on his phone and looked faintly embarrassed to have been caught. Normal. All of it normal. She was good at this. By the time the round was finished and she was back at the nurse's station filling in the log, she had almost entirely displaced the oddness of the sealed room from her thoughts. Almost. It sat at the back of her mind the way a name you can't quite remember sits. Present. Insisting quietly on attention. Waiting. Dalton appeared at her shoulder at 11:40. "I'll be in the staff room if you need me. Full emergency protocol is in the binder. You've read it?" "Before I came in," Sarah said. "Good." Dalton pulled on her cardigan. "Quiet night. Should stay quiet."
She paused in the doorway. "And Okafor?" "Yes. If you hear anything from the east end of the corridor." She stopped. We considered. We walked whatever she had been about to say. "The pipes in this wing are old. They make sounds sometimes. Groaning, knocking. You'll hear things that seem like they're coming from behind the walls. It's the pipes. The brief, controlled pause. It's always the pipes." She left before Sarah could respond. The floor settled into the brick.
She was updating a chart at the nurse's station at 12:04 a.m. when she heard it. A single sound from the east end of the corridor. Not a pipe. She knew the sound of hospital pipes. She'd grown up in a building with them, had listened to their irregular language since childhood. This was not a groan or a knock or the percussion of pressurized water through aging metal. This was a sound she recognized immediately, without deliberation, the way you recognize the voice of someone you know. A heart monitor. One single tone, the long, clean beep of a monitor registering a heartbeat. And then silence. One beat. One. Sarah set down her pen. She looked down the corridor. The far end was dim, the failed fluorescents casting their absence like a held breath. She could see the outline of the sealed door, or rather the place where it should be. That faint impression in the painted-over wall that she'd noticed on the walk. The cold was stronger now. She could feel it from where she sat.